Just got back on Friday from my trip with my family to Colorado. So it's good to be back home. It was a relaxing trip. We spent a lot of time hiking in the beautiful mountain scenery. So with such trips, and maybe you yourselves have gone on trips this summer, whether to visit family or for vacations, it's even more so on my mind after reading some of the readings we have today, this traveling. In the first reading from Amos, he's called by God to travel from his home country in Judea and to travel to Israel. And there he's been called by God to be a prophet, calling the people to repent. Unfortunately, we see in there that Amos and his message were not well received. But I'm glad that, on the other hand, while I was gone, you welcomed warmly Father Lewis, who was our mission priest last week. In the gospel, it's precisely what Jesus does with the apostles. He sends them out 2 by 2 to extend his ministry of preaching and healing to many different places. So our missions continue to do that today. Now, it's great to go and see other places, whether it's for a fun vacation or maybe it's for work or like Amos and the apostles to serve the Lord. Or maybe for some, it's even to go and to live in that other place and work there. John Paul II explained that we all have this right to travel. Every human being has the right to this freedom to move within our own country. Of course, it's always good to be back home in our own bed. Yet, there are some people who don't have quite the same kind of freedom when it comes to choosing whether they will stay or whether they will travel afar. Some may be driven to move for reasons of safety or reasons to need to support themselves or their families. And so John Paul II, in describing what the church teaches, continued and said that when there are just reasons, man must be permitted to migrate even to other countries and take up residence there. You know, today the issue of immigration continues to be a heated topic in our country. Opinions can range to wide extremes. At one, the prevention of all migrants from entering the country and quick apprehension and deportation of those that are unauthorized. And then on the other end, that all immigrants, regardless of legal or not, should be welcomed and their poverty and burdens alleviated by the rights and benefits and privileges available to citizens. Our bishops, and particularly I look at our bishops in Nebraska, have noted that these kinds of views really don't fully describe what the church teaches, nor are they always feasible or realistic. So how, as Catholics, should we begin to think? What are the principles that are given to us by our faith to consider such an issue? Well, one of the most important principles that we have in our faith is our belief in the dignity of all human life, the right to life. That's why, as a church, we spend so much time on the life issues, that we're pro-life. But an issue like this, of immigration, actually can be derived from that most important right of life. So if we think about it, the church also talks about having a right to those things that we need in order to have life. It's not just good enough to say you have a right to life, you need the things that support it. So the church speaks of a right to access food and water, because it's what we need in order to live. We need that. And then in order to get food and water, it says we have a right to work. A right to, maybe it's work on our own place, to dig a well, or to grow our own food. And so in that case, the church also says we have a right to private property, to have a place that we own where we can live and have food and water so that we can have a right to life. And the church then will also say that we have a right to a just wage, because not all of us can grow the food that we want to eat. We go to the store and we buy it. And so we have a right to work to be able to have enough money to receive food and water so that we can live. And so that's where the right to migrate actually comes from. Because if we happen to live in a place where we can't find enough food, or we can't find enough water, or we can't find work to be able to have the food and water for our family, it's not as if we just give up our right to live. But no, we have a right then to go and find the place where we can find work, where we can have the food and water so that we can live. And maybe that's happened to some of us, where we've had to move to a new place to find the job to support ourselves or our family. And this right to migrate becomes more complicated because it affects the rights of others. So, for example, you can't just move anywhere. We wouldn't say, well, I can move into your house without your okay. So there's restrictions on that. And even in nations, the church teaches have the right to protect and control borders for the safety of their citizens. But it also says, at the same time, there's an obligation of nations to work for the good of all people. And so in the Catechism of the Church, we read that the more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they're able, to welcome the foreigner in search of security and means of livelihood, which he cannot find in his country of origin. Catechism also says that immigrants also have a responsibility, that they're obliged to respect with gratitude the heritage of the country that receives them and obey its laws and assist in carrying out the civic burdens. So, knowing those things, people of goodwill can have legitimate disagreements and discussions about perhaps the extent a country is able to welcome immigrants, or how to respond when some may fail to respect the laws of the country they desire to enter. A final right that the Church upholds that's very important to this area is the right to family. Families are right because they provide the context of our lives. The Church will always seek to protect the family, protect family unity. And so in the area of immigration too, families have to be taken into account. So the Church doesn't put forth specific policies that a country must do, so we won't get into any of that. But instead it gives these principles upon which we are to think about and hopefully make our decisions, the way that we act, the way that we enact laws. The bishops of our country have asked that policies provide a mechanism, legal mechanism for entry of immigrants, create an equitable process for citizenship, and ensure that laws are enforced in a way that respects the process of law, the sanctity of all human life, the value of the family, and the integrity of a country's borders. Trying to balance all that, of course, is quite the challenge. We don't always do that very well. In our first reading, Amos didn't start out as a prophet. As he told the king there, he was originally a shepherd and a migrant seasonal worker. As a foreigner, the king just simply wanted Amos to leave, not to be around. But the gospel that Amos, that Jesus, that the apostles preached goes deeper than that. As Paul explains in the second reading, every human person God chose before the world began to be his adopted sons and daughters. So whether someone is at home or afar, whether they remain in one place or they're forced to travel to some other one, the way that we treat all people needs to reflect that love of the Father.